Just another couple of minutes, and then we can start off with the proceedings.
Okay. Just give me a second, I'll be back.
Yep.
And I have a hard stop at the whatever. It's at the top of the hour, I guess, for you.
That would be correct. Yes. And plus or minus 5 minutes here and there, that's not a problem. So. I'm sorry, Siddharth couldn't be here today.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
All right, I think students can join in and we can make a start now. So a very good evening to everybody who is present here today. Welcome to yet another guest lecture by the Indian School of Business and Finance in New Delhi. Today we have with us Mr. Glen Fernandes, who's joined us from the UAE. A little bit of an introduction about Mr. Fernandes, who's joined us today. He's from Goa and is currently a senior banker with over 20 years of experience in the industry. He's worked in various capacities, from risk management to investment banking to security services at global banks across multiple international locations. He currently works at the Bank of New York Mellon as a senior executive for the Middle East and Africa region. And as I mentioned before, he's currently based out of Dubai. On the personal front, Glen has an undergraduate degree in finance, international business and IT from Marquette University, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in the USA, and a master's in economics from DePaul University. He's highly passionate about social and values-based investing, which is the topic for today's guest lecture, and he will tell us exactly what it means and what it entails, and has been also active with many startups in this area, and has also been an entrepreneur himself through an edtech platform that he co-founded in India. So with that, Glen, I would yield the floor to you, and you can take it forward from here.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining. And it's really an honor to be here with you and talking to you. And I'm really glad just to have this conversation, because I think, you know, when the business forum asked me to do this, I think the key thing we were talking about was topics, and I understand from all of the feedback everybody wants to talk about investment management and how do you make money, right? I think that's the route that people look at. So perhaps before we get into that, you know, and I purposely changed the topic around, rather than talking about investments and investment management and how do you create wealth, I wanted to talk about values and social investing, and I'll come to that in a second. But maybe, to elaborate on my background, since my understanding is a lot of you are in high school and 12th grade and also at college. My background, I was very much in your shoes over 25 years ago. I actually grew up in an Indian educational system. I did my board exams, and then after my board exams, I actually went to the US for college. Went to do genetic engineering initially, and then ended up in computer science. So I did the two common Indian things, I would say. I went to go be a doctor, and then your parents told me, to be a computer science person. I ended up in business accidentally, and I loved it, right? So sometimes what we go for is not what we end up with. And the benefit of the US educational system was that it enabled me to switch multiple times without having a deterrent there. But after that, I actually started working at a hedge fund trading floor. I was actually an IT programmer there, and moved into business from there, and started in banking, and did a lot of work around risk management and credit, where I was looking at corporations, seeing, kicking the tires around which corporations would be successful, which would not, lending money to them. And basically, what I say is I used to do was what auditors and chartered accountants would do in terms of creating financials. I would rip them apart and be the forensic guy who would say that they're either embellishing them or blushing them, or they don't have a proper strategy. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then went to my passion was emerging markets, and particularly because coming from India, I was very keen about seeing infrastructure develop in these markets, and banking was such a key component of economies. So I spent a good 18 years actually looking at banks, in particular banks in Africa and banks in other emerging markets, including many Asian countries. And the reason for that is, I think we live in a centralized society system, right, where you've got a nation state, and then the nation state is controls the banks in a way, and then the banks basically filter money. So money supply, if you think about it, goes in from the central bank into the banks and into the economy. And when you have more money supply, you have more access to money. When you have less money supply, you have inflation, or you have interest rates that rise, and there's yield, right? So there's a bit of that. So I got interested in that, because how do you actually create sound banking infrastructure? So I was doing that for a long time, but from a risk management perspective as well. So I used to go to Africa quite a bit, and used to spend a lot of time in the Middle East. I actually spent my time growing up between the Middle East and India. So Middle East was close to home as well. So I ended up moving to the Middle East for a bit. Now, I say a bit, but I've been here for 10 years now, working here in various capacities. So a lot of this was at large banks. So I was at JP Morgan for 10 years, and then I was at HSBC for another 10 years. And now I'm at Bank of New York Mellon, and doing precisely this, working with sovereigns and banks around infrastructure and how do we actually look at that. Now, the reason why I bring this up is I think, when you start to look at infrastructure, and maybe talking about the topic that you guys have given me in terms of investment management, right? I think that one of the things, and I'm very passionate about the infrastructure space or banking space, because economies need to grow. And I think the emerging market scenario around economies is we all want to become developed. And that's the thing about it. But somewhere along the way, we've lost the concept of values, right? So if you talk to anybody about where do you want to do and what are you trying to do, people always talk about making money nowadays. People don't talk about building good schools or building good infrastructure or having good governance. And actually, what's happened with developed economies was a byproduct, right? Money was a byproduct of good infrastructure, good investments, good education, good social values. And then somehow along the way, because of the income, maybe the income inequality gap, I don't know the answer to this, but something has made us latch on to something that's humanly instinctual, which is greed, right? So then we always talk about how do we make money, and money in and of itself has no value. It's an IOU, right? Anytime you have a currency, it's an IOU. So my whole thing is, people who want to invest, and a lot of people do, they invest so that they can grow their monetary position, not necessarily their wealth. And I make the distinction between money and wealth because money is something that you have in your bank account and it grows. Wealth is something that is much more encompassing, and it includes your happiness, it includes your social environment, it includes your neighbor in that, right? And so for me, we need to move away from this whole concept of money making money. And I think, to give you some history, and you guys probably look at a lot of this stuff, right? We always talk about colonialism in a context. And Mark Carney, who used to be the Bank of England governor, he made a very good point. He said, at some stage, if you think about our economic systems are driven by our mentality. And if you think about the economic systems of colonialism, it was all about extracting money, right? And extracting value from other societies. So when you look at 300, 400 years of, and he made this point, he said, if you look at 300, 400 years of Latin American colonization, the entire European sphere of influence was to go into Latin America, plunder Latin America for its gold. All that gold got made into nice little bars of gold, and it sits under the River Thames at the Bank of England. 70% of the supply of gold that is there internationally sits under the Thames. So we took something from the ground and we made it nice and we put it back into the ground. And an entire economic system was developed by that, right? And so what value was that to society at the end of the day? So today, when the Reserve Bank of India is buying a piece of gold, everybody says India is buying gold, right? India is buying gold. When India is buying gold as a central bank, they're not buying gold, they're buying a component of gold that's sitting in the UK under the River Thames, and somebody's sitting there with a ledger and just saying, okay, National Bank of Kazakhstan sold gold to India, and the UK is keeping the books and records of this gold that is sitting there because nobody's physically moving gold across the world, right? So, I think this whole concept of money to make money, we need to think about, because that piece just doesn't work, right? And I think a lot of religions also have that as part of their ethos, and there's probably a reason for that. The second thing is, when we look at money, I think, the other thing is we need to consider the wider factor. Like, so today we've got a lot of corporate behemoths in the world. You look at the Amazons of this world, or you look at the Teslas or the Googles of this world, and they've made a lot of money. They've got a lot of wealth. And if you look at, I think today there was an article that came up again and keeps surfacing. During COVID, the top 10 richest men doubled their income in terms of just sitting there passively, and they doubled their income, whilst the majority of the world has seen a fall in income. And so we talk about this income inequality gap, and when the top 1% of the world has a concentration of wealth, that's not necessarily a good thing as well. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but one of my favorite bands is U2, and Bono had a saying at one point. He's the lead singer of U2, and he had this saying: you can't live in an island of prosperity when there's a sea of despair, right? And what I mean by that is, I think he's spot on, right? So if you live in an island of prosperity and there's a whole bunch of people around you that are living in a sea of despair, you will see it indirectly or directly. And you see this happening in a lot of emerging market societies. And I travel a lot. I used to go to South Africa a lot. South Africa is a great stark example. When people started to get wealthy in South Africa and they left the majority of the population behind, you start to see people come up with compounds, and then security, and then all these other things. And safety becomes a problem at the end of the day. So my whole thing is, well, what point is you making money and making wealth if you're going to be sitting behind a compound with a whole bunch of guards because you're worried about all the poverty that's around you that's going to actually come and rob you, or that influences crime, right? So there's a bit of that, and this is why as society we should be carrying each other along the way, and then the third thing, which I think this whole piece around wealth, where we're going into, and I think it's you guys are all young and you should think about it as well, is, and that's why I wanted to have this topic around values, is today when I look at wealth, I mean, everybody will talk about things like crypto, NFTs, you're talking about this whole alternative universe and the metaverse as well in terms of investing. And you look at those things, and some of it, you look, the technology is great, some of it is there, but some of it just doesn't make sense, right? But some of it, because of greed, people kind of go into it because they want to create more wealth out of it. But what is the societal impact and the societal value that's coming from that? So for me, I'm bringing up these three things because I think, you know, we've got to tackle these three things as people, as society, in terms of wealth creation. And when we look at wealth, we should really be looking at, you know, it's a pie that's growing, and how do we actually have a equal share, or everybody sharing in that pie growing, right? Because that's the point of it. It's not I have something and I've got to take it from somebody else to become wealthy, because the pie is always growing. It's not staying constant. It may shrink, like in places like Zimbabwe and all, it definitely shrunk, you know, but usually the pies in most countries, they're growing. And how do you actually share in that wealth, right? So you don't want one person having 90% of the growing pie. You want everybody in society benefiting from that. So the way I look at it, it's like, you know, I think about values a lot, and I think about value-based investing. So when we, my kind of message would be like, I personally, me and my family, we're into permaculture, and if anybody has questions around permaculture, we can always think about it. But I think about things from, it'll get a little bit philosophical, but permaculture is the art of and design of farming. And if you think about our economic systems have a lot of boom and bust in them, right? So, and it's like, if you look at nature, we're all part of nature. And if you look at nature, it's very easy to grow grass, for example. And if you grow grass, it grows quickly, but it also dies quickly. But if you want to replicate a rainforest, it's a very difficult thing to do because it takes a long time, but there's so many interconnected relationships in a rainforest that it lasts over 1 million years, right? And so how do we take our economic systems and our wealth creation systems to reflect on that? And so for me, from a values perspective, we've got to go back to basics, and we've got to think about, what does it mean for us as a society? What are we actually trying to achieve? And if you think about human necessities and human needs, we have three basic human needs, right? We've got the need for food, we've got the need for water, we've got the need for shelter. That's the only three things we need in life. And so when you actually look at that, you know, how do you actually, and in the speak of permaculture always talk about people care, earth care, and fair share, right? So everything we invest in, how do you actually look at it from an investing standpoint? Is it hurting or hindering the environment, right? Is it hurting or hindering society? Is it economically beneficial? Is it moving us into a society that we want to predict, right? I mean, a lot of people will invest, who invested in Facebook. I'm not one of them, but we invested in Facebook. But today, if you look at it, we're sitting down and we're having a self-reflection of, is Facebook and the model of Facebook a society that we actually want for the future? And I think we need to kind of look at that from the basic perspective when we're looking at investing. And that piece, I think, is a very, very important aspect of how we actually should be looking at investing. And there's a lot of stuff there. We'll get some things right, we'll get some things wrong, right? But I think a lot of the times we don't ask those questions. And that is the challenge with a lot of the investing that we do today. The asset management industry, the wealth management industry has gotten so large that it's all about making money. And it's not about the end uses of it, or the end investment of what we want within society. So, you know, for me personally, you know, I don't, I'm a horrible investor for one, but we can talk about that if you want to talk about it. But, you know, I try to actually, I sleep well at night. So my whole things, when I sit down and I look at investing, I actually have a couple of things that I think about. I think about, you know, is something circular? You know, how much waste does it create? I'll give you a very crazy stat, right? So 90% of what we produce actually goes back into landfills. And if you think about it, we take from the earth and we do a bunch of things, and then it ends up going into a landfill, which is not sustainable, right? So how much waste does something create? How circular can an economy get, or a company get, or a product get? I look at those things in terms of investing. You know, how sustainable is it? who benefits from it economically? Is it a benefit for society? Is it not? Do I think it's good? Do I think it's not? And when I start to look at that, you kind of say, okay, well, what does your portfolio look like? And if somebody wanted to ask me that, I guess. And for me, I have a very simple investment strategy. So I've invested in a house because I need shelter and that basic need. And in that piece, I only need one house, right? I don't understand this whole concept of people buying multiple houses in a way all across the world, which, I'm only going to use one of them, right? Or maybe two if you have a holiday home. The rest of the time you can rent. It's not the end of the world. So I kind of have a little bit of that because I want to be able to live somewhere. I don't want to stay out in the street. So that's one thing. I'm very interested and active on the venture capital front. And this is with largely with social impact firms. So firms that are actually doing things that I think are cool, for one. And I'm an active investor. I'm not a passive investor. There's a lot of people who are passive investors. I like to speak to the owner, understand it because of my risk background as well. I like to do due diligence on them and help hopefully shape some thought processes, because a lot of people have a lot of things that they're thinking about when they're at that young stage, right? So I have a probably close to a dozen investments on that front. Some I'm more active on, some I'm not. Some I sit on the board on. And to give you a couple of examples, I sat on a board for an underground farming in London, a firm that was doing farming underground to keep London self-sustainable on food, because food tends to come in from 2-3 hours a day. That's one example. Another one that I'm a non-exec advisor for at the moment is a Portuguese company that's actually doing helping companies organize their ESG strategy to meet the climate initiatives or the UN Sustainable Goals initiatives that has been set out by the world. And so they've got a little bit of a tech platform where they actually help organize this for the head of sustainability. It's a really cool platform, and it collects all this data and it actually provides consultancy on it. So, so these are the kind of things I get involved in. On that, I had my own ed tech startup because I believed in that as well. And this was all around, the social economic impact of actually studying and doing what you want to do rather than what your parents want you to do. And I think, in my story that I gave you, for example, I'm a huge extrovert, but, medical, or at least genetic engineering and computer science are very introverted fields of study. So that's the reasons why I switched. So we were doing something around data and analytics on that. So I have this venture capital piece that I look at. I'm very interested in new technologies, so I look at technologies as well as something else, as a system. I do like some of the things that are coming out with tokenization and not necessarily crypto, but tokenization and what's happening there, but more from a standpoint of, rather than investing in the metaverse and all, how are you looking at things like universal health cards, or how are you looking at tokenization of, there's a company that right now that I was talking to that's working with the UN around tokenization of refugee identities, right? Because when a refugee goes from one place to another, how do you prove who you are? How do you actually get those things? So this company works on tokenization of things like degrees, all these other things for refugees when they go start a new life somewhere else. So, so those are the kind of things. And then, some funds, because you need to have some assets liquid, and you want to make sure that, in case you lose your job, or in case you need money, or you have a health crisis, or parents are sick, or something like that, you need to be able to liquidate something and generate cash, then you do that. But even in that, they are social things. Like I've stayed away from things that are like oil and gas, where you could make money, but I don't believe in putting my money there. So, or vindication things, right? Like sometimes I might have a political view, I might stay away from countries that have bad human rights violations or something like that. So those are the kind of things that I look at personally. And I just wanted to have this topic because I think you'll get a lot of people that come and talk about investing, but I think for society and where we're going, we need to be more values driven. And values are very important. I think we share values. We all want to be good neighbors, and why can't we be good investors? And that's kind of what I wanted to say. I wanted to leave lots of time for questions because I like an interaction. So I'm just gonna kind of end there, unless you would like me to say something else. But yeah. So otherwise, I'll field questions.
Good. All right, thank you so much there, Glenn. And the floor is open for questions. I've written down a few questions myself, so I'm definitely going to bombard you on that front.
No problem. More the merrier.
Yeah, but to all the students who are attending this lecture, as interactive as possible. So to any of you who has questions, you can either use the chat window if that's accessible to you, or you can go ahead and use the Q&A section to go ahead and add your questions over there. And just to kickstart the Q&A process, let me go ahead and ask you a question that I've, there's of course one question which I would like to leave till the end, which is the bigger picture sort of a thing. But looking at the micro level, day-to-day sort of a scenario, you have, and this is something which I feel as well when I'm trying to, I have a particular political ideology that I believe in. And it may or may not align with the current dispensation. Most likely doesn't. So, it puts me in situations where I have to go ahead and make choices, right? And many times when you're at a professional level, you have to make a choice, but that choice is not within your hands because of, say, for example, I'm not talking about my current organization, but in general, a lot of people go through that. The organization chooses to align to a particular ideology, not necessarily a political one, but just a line of thinking, so to speak. So how do you balance that factor on a day-to-day basis when you're working for an organization?
Look, I think that's a great question, right? And I've struggled with that throughout my career to a certain aspect, because look, let's be open about it, right? I work at a bank, and it's not like banks have been innocent around the fallout from the cultural elements or something. Sorry, the fallout from the last one. Somebody's standing outside my office wanting to come in, but anyways, so the last financial crisis, all these things, there's a big challenges, right? But the way I look at it is two things. One is I sit in a position of being able to make change, for one. And so how do I align myself with that? So if I look at what I'm doing on a daily basis, I sit down with a lot of clients, and I work with governments and with financial institutions. And if you think about the trickle-down economics, there's a huge amount of sphere of influence of power that I actually can influence in these clients, and I should be. So I don't take a passive role on it, right? So when I am speaking to the minister in Saudi Arabia about something, and this is an example, I was speaking with the minister of something, we were talking about the tougher decisions around, how you're creating efficient legal frameworks, how are you creating certain equality pieces, or how are you creating ESG, what are you doing about it, right? So that piece, I have a sphere of influence to do. The second piece I would say, which I'm super driven by, which is exactly what this call was about as well, is a lot of young people have very different notions of what we actually have in a corporation today, of what they expect in a corporation today, right? And if you are a leader managing a whole bunch of millennials, and I'm not a millennial by any stretch of the imagination, but how do you inspire a workforce of people to come to you towards a common mission? And today, people don't take jobs like the old days for clipping a check, I say, right? Nobody goes to the office to clip a check and then come back. People want a sense of purpose. People want a sense of what are they doing, and something meaningful. And if you as a corporation are not moving in that direction, you may not be there today, but you need to move in that direction, then that is an important piece for attracting talent and attracting the people that are going to help shape the organization for the future. Otherwise, you become a dinosaur, right? And I think that's what you're seeing in the world today. If you look at in the last, I would say, 15 years on top industries that people wanted to actually work for, banking was one of the top ones that people chose out of university. Today, it's not the case. People want to go into a tech place or they want to go into some other place, right? So that's what I would say. I think it's a matter of manufacturing, of doing both, right? If you're a leader, then help affect the change. If you are a person that's junior, help drive the change, right? And I think it comes back to, you know, our founding father as Indians, and you know, Mahatma Gandhi used to say, right, if you want to be the change you want to be in the world, and I think we need to do that.
That was pretty inspiring, actually, especially the last particular section. I think I really liked how you sort of summed it up in that sense as to how, if you're not in a leadership position, you can at least drive the change at whichever position that you're in whichever circle that you can go ahead and influence. And that sort of adds a sort of collective social responsibility, so to speak, I would call it. Yeah, okay, so we have two questions from some of the students. Two questions from some of the students. I'm going to go by one. One is completely different from what we are. Well, it's a little about the metaverse, and I was expecting a few questions regarding that. What is your view on Web3 taking over the world and the metaverse becoming a potential new world in the future?
Yeah. So look, I think it's actually good. I think that actually, you know, the metaverse for me, and I think we need to, and this is why I wanted to have this discussion around values, right? What is the metaverse supposed to be? What do we want it to be? I mean, we are moving into that direction, right? We pretty much live online. I mean, we're having this call right now that's online. So if we're talking about this as an example, and all of a sudden, from a metaverse standpoint, instead of having this Zoom call where it's actually two-dimensional, you know, you're not getting a sense of it. If we actually we're in a metaverse having this call where it's three-dimensional, it's reality, and you could get to a stage where you're even having touch or something like that, or the sensation of touch. It's a good thing, right? We will save on travel, we will save on the environmental cost of that, and we will be interacting that way. Now, where I kind of don't agree with the metaverse in a way is where we get into things like, and I think we're getting, and we're the crossroads on that, right? Or we have to define it. It's really early. Web 3.0 is really early, and we should define what we want, which is why I say we have to align it to values. Now, what I'm seeing in the metaverse as well is, look, people, and it's a good point around wealth, people are going out, and rich people go out and they buy multiple houses, for example. I'm just using this as an example. They buy multiple houses, for example. And when they buy multiple houses, what happens? The cost of housing goes up. The cost of real estate goes up. Now, do we have enough real estate in the world? Yeah, hell yeah, we do. But we keep building more and taking away from the natural environment because everybody wants 2-3 houses if they have a lot of money. Now, what does that do for a young person? If you look at the gap of wealth and somebody young coming from college, a lot of people are not buying their primary homes anymore, and they're delaying it further and further because it's too expensive now to do that. So what they're doing is they're opting for renting. Now, the point is fine, you know, you can rent, but now all of a sudden, and this is why I say it's a monetary thing, because all of a sudden people start to do the trade-off, right? So if you went and invested in real estate in the metaverse, and you bought a piece of land in the metaverse, so you bought a piece of a house in the metaverse, the return on your investment in the metaverse is much higher than going out and buying a real estate in the real world, which is a big ticket item for one. So you need a lot of money to do it. And then on top of that, the growth might be 5%, right? Whereas if you bought something in the metaverse, you might buy it for, say, let's use 100,000, 10%, or you could buy 10,000 in the metaverse and it's growing by 1,000%. People are putting their money there. But my whole point is, that's all about money. It's not about, is this a value? You're like, do we really want to live in that world? Are we going to touch that land? Are we going to want to sit there? You know, I think there was a recent one where somebody paid $350,000 to buy a house in the metaverse next to where Snoop Dogg bought a house, right? Like, I mean, are you really going to be having that interaction with Snoop Dogg? Is that a reality that we want to live in? And I think that's what I mean, right? So whereas if you're talking about this 3D reality of making collaboration across the planet easier through 3D, or you're talking about, healthcare, like instead of actually going to the doctor, we're going to actually interact in the metaverse around healthcare, and it's more accessible to all, then I think it makes much more sense, right? So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Right. Right. I hope that answers the question to the anonymous attendee who sent us that question. Let's move on to Mehek, who's asked a question. How would you consider India as an investment country? Or I think Mehek probably means, how does India look like right now as an investment destination, maybe? Yeah.
Look, I think right now, I think if you want to look at it from so we see a lot of interest in India at the moment, and there's a lot of interest in India because India is underinvested. So when you look at things like infrastructure, when you look at things like banking, India has a lot of catching up to do. On the quality of infrastructure, on the types of pieces that we need in banking, all these other things. So there's a lot of investment there, right? That comes from that. Second is that there is a lot of India is also a tech play, which is a very interesting play globally today, and there's a lot of tech companies that are there in India. So I think from that perspective, there's a lot of people who are long India today, and also as an alternative to China. So you've actually seen this pullback from China given the geopolitical situation. So people are also investing in India from that standpoint. Now, where there are challenges with India is more around, when you talk to international investors, at least, there's two things. One is around the ease of doing business, and the ease of actually, it's not an easy place to do business, and it can be a difficult investment destination. And then the second piece is around currency, because Indian currency tends to depreciate against the dollar, particularly where people put a lot of their money, but that's because India has a twin deficit, right? So India has a trade deficit because it imports a lot of goods, and then it also has a current account deficit because it imports a lot of oil and is highly dependent on oil. So some of the currency situation is highly tied with that. So, but India is a very good long-term positive story, and it's moving in that direction where people are super interested in it because of the tech play, because of the infrastructure play, and because of the new economy play. I think some of the transition away from oil and all will also be positive for India. So India produces a lot of wind at the moment, and things like that. So, I think a medium to long-term good story that's coming, right? I think for me, the question, if you come back to the whole thing, I think so. Investment-wise, India is a good story. My question to everyone is, are we making it equitable?
Yeah.
That's a different story, right? My fear, and this is a personal view, my fear for India, and I love my country and I love everything there, is I worry about COVID, right? And the reason why I worry about COVID is not because of India as an investment destination. We're 1.3 billion people with a reasonably high unemployment rate. And one of the things is education, particularly I have a 6-year-old daughter who is in India, and she was studying there till now. I moved her out because schools were closed for over a year, and she had trouble reading and writing. And she was at that age where she was learning to read and write. And, we have money. We're reasonably well off, so I can afford tutoring. I can afford those things. So it's fine. But what do we do long term, and what are we doing as a society? And that's why I say it's important with values about say the driver, the maid, the house help, or whoever who have an average family size of 4 to 5, and they've got one device, and government schools have been shut down for a large part of COVID, and not all their kids are going to school, right? And they're not going to catch up. And so what do we do about that unemployment, not today, but that unemployment that's looming 10 years from now, when 65% of the jobs as we know today are going to be replaced by technology? I think that's a very important question for us as a country. So
yeah, I completely agree with you there. But well, a lot of government schools are implementing online learning, from what I know, on the ground situation. But the environment of a school is what is sort of, is what is missing at this point of time. And
yeah, so you're right to a certain degree, right? So one is online. Government schools absolutely have done that and they've caught up with that. But my point is that the consumer, right? So when you actually look at a lot of people, they don't have a lot of devices. So if they've got 3-4 kids, they all have to do the school at the same time and they only have one device. It's not like they have 4 devices. And then the second is that when you're doing online school, it's not about just the recordings, right? We struggle with it from a business perspective. We've had to change the way we interact business-wise online because it is not the same as having a physical meeting. So you have a little bit of change of structure. So, that's what I mean by that, is that how are we doing
absolutely
that? How are we as society changing that, right? We need to not forget about that.
Right, absolutely. Okay, what are your thoughts on the rise of cryptocurrencies and their impact on the environment? I think you answered this in a way while you were speaking, as even along with the previous question as well. What should or can be done with regards to this? Maybe that's something you would probably want to.
So my thing, look, I think I'm not too bothered by the rise of crypto in terms of the energy piece, because I think that you're seeing it, right? Like, I mean, today, I think this week it was Serbia that basically, or Kosovo, was it? Yeah, Kosovo, that basically stopped crypto mining because 90% of the people didn't have access to electricity. And then all of a sudden, they're using their electricity to crypto mine. Or you saw this in Kazakhstan with the whole Russia issue. So I think what's happening with crypto mining is you're starting to notice that people are moving away from low-cost energy providers to renewable energy providers. So they're starting to go into areas like Scandinavia, where electricity ends up becoming free because it's generated largely from renewable sources, right? So that's one trend I think you're seeing in the crypto world. The second trend you're seeing in the crypto world is people are, and I don't know how I feel about it, to be frank, but people are moving away from a concept of proof of work into proof of stake, right? So Ethereum changed their whole thing at the middle of last year on that. Now, my problem with proof of stake is I think it comes back to this investor's dilemma, right? If you've got 1,000 coins out there and 60% of them are sitting in the hands of one person and you're doing proof of stake, then at the end of the day, are you going back to a centralized world, which is what the whole concept of crypto was brought out, was about decentralization, because now all of a sudden you're putting power back into a single hand. So I think democratization of that piece, I think, is important to keep watch of. I think the second piece to keep watch of is, I think societally, are people really convinced about living in a decentralized world? Your mom and dad or your grandparents, do they want a decentralized world, or are they still looking at their banks to bail them out through the government, right? And if we're looking at it from that angle, I don't think we're really ready for a completely decentralized world. So I think what will be interesting to see is when stable coins come out, and a lot of central banks, and we work with some of them, that are actually looking at stable coins. If they start to issue stable coins, what is the impact on crypto when stable coins come out? So I think that's, those are a couple of things I would say to watch as trends.
Okay. I had a question, which I had written down right in the beginning. Well, actually, there's a very interesting question over here by Akshat Dudeja. He says, it's fairly long. I heard in a podcast from Gary V that NFTs are going to be a boomer for the next couple of years. And then they're going to burst like a bubble due to too much of circulation. But from about 5 to 7 years after this, it's going to be a long-term thing of buying and selling NFTs, unlike it's short-term as of now. How far is this true? And what will be your suggestion to be as an aspiring investor?
So look, NFTs are one of the things I'm not convinced on. at the moment. And the reason why I'm not convinced on them is NFTs. Yeah, I was listening to somebody the other day who basically I thought put it really interesting. He said, when you're buying an NFT, all you're buying is a receipt, right? You're buying a receipt that you own some art or you own something. You're not, and when you look at the data so far, I think it's a very young space. So I think something like 60-70% of NFTs last year were actually defrauded people. So people are creating them and defrauding people out of their wealth, right? So I think that's one thing. There's a lot of fraud in that space. The second thing is, and I actually played with NFTs, and I'll tell you a little story, because my wife is a photojournalist and a photographer. And I was convinced that she should put her stuff on NFTs and sell them. And she made a really interesting point. She said, okay, look, if I put it on there, she's very concerned because it's her work, right? Her body of work. She said, well, who owns the copyright? I was like, I don't know. So I did some research. And you don't own the copyright when you own an NFT. So I said, nobody owns a copyright. She's like, well, wait a minute. So you're telling me that this thing will sell for, I don't know, $100,000 if I create just 5 of them. But if I sell 5 and, 5 years down the road, I wanted to do another 5, nobody stops me because of my copyright, right? And so there's this whole piece about NFTs where the British Museum, for example, is selling artwork at the moment on NFTs, but you can't go and pick up that artwork in the British Museum, right? So that piece, I think, there's going to be a bubble that has to crash in the NFT space. Now, there's another piece of NFTs, which is this virtual world, right? So there's, I think there's the AFX and there's some games and all that are out there at the moment where, there are unique character NFTs that you can buy and play, and then they have unique DNA apparently, and you can reproduce them and you get something out. Now, those things will do well as far as that game is popular, right? And as long as that game is popular and more people start to play it and more people see value in it, then yes, right? And for me, I don't see the value in NFTs at the moment, but one day will there be a value? I don't know, right? Value is all what we as society, and I think that's my point, is value is what we as society give it. I mean, we pay football players millions of dollars because we value watching football. Now, what's the value of watching football to society? You could argue it has some happiness factor and all, but is it more valuable than a teacher? and that's the piece, right? So I think at some point, when the entire society puts value on something, it becomes valuable. That's the point of value.
True. I'll have 2 last questions, one from a student and one from me, and then we can, end the session. Shubh Goyal says, seeing so many new things coming to the world, how do we keep up as a student with the society? I think in terms of technology and various options.
Yeah, but I think you've got to, I don't think you're going to be able to keep up with everything that's happening in society. I struggle with everything that's happening in society, especially today. It's super fast paced. There's so many interesting things happening. I think, where you have an interest, constantly learn. I mean, my attitude is I do a couple of things. So I read a lot. I'm constantly reading books that I'm interested in. Sometimes I force myself to read fiction books because I read way too many nonfiction books. I listen to podcasts. If I'm driving to work, I'm listening to various news pieces. I take certain courses. Life's a journey of learning. And I think this whole concept of you go to college, you do 4 years, and then you come out, and then you take work till retirement is gone. If you're not consistently upskilling or learning, and that doesn't mean getting a degree over and over again, because sometimes people go back to school over and over again, which is also not a good return on investment. But it's about self knowledge, right? So find an interest and just keep at it. Find different mediums to get involved.
Right. Okay. Last question for today's session, and this might have either a short answer or a long one. I don't know what's going to be.
Sure.
right in the beginning of it, when you were explaining, you were sort of setting the context for the whole guest lecture for today. You were mentioning how governments and businesses need to operate in a more inclusive manner, if I have to paraphrase your words, so to speak. Now, certain countries, we're primarily driven by a capitalistic, we live in a capitalistic world, and we're driven by capitalistic economies. Some, which are capitalist, but they call themselves communist, but others which are completely free market economies. But then you also have an area like the Scandinavian region, which is highly inclusive in nature socially, and also provides a lot of welfare-based amenities and services to its, to its population in general, right? And so, do you think that's is that the way forward in general? And how does, say, how do countries basically? How do you convince countries to transition from the model that they're following at this point of time to a more inclusive and a values, socially inclusive and a values-based economy, which is ideally what you're working for at the end of the day? I mean, as a personal goal in general, I think.
Yeah, look, so I think you brought up this point, right? So I think the values we all share, and I don't think there isn't this thing around also capitalism is bad or socialism is good or whatever it is. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about what we value as a society and what we want as a society, right? Like, I mean, let's just take your example for a second. When you're talking about Scandinavian countries or even Europe in general, you know what? Yeah, it's a socialist system where you have high taxes, but then your education is free, right? Now, if you actually looked at the U.S., which is quote unquote a free market system, and you actually take household income, which is what we will look at, right? And you actually add on the cost of medical insurance, you add on the cost of university, you add on the cost of all the things that you're paying for in a free market society, your effective tax rate is 70% versus Europe, where it's something like 45%, right? So I think we need to also compare apples and apples in that. Now, you may end up going and saying, what, I want choice. Well, in Europe, I think there is a choice that they've made, right? So I think a lot of European countries have made a choice that the large majority of the population want to have a free education system or whatever it is, and whatever the output is the output, right? In the US, people have made a different choice, but it's not necessarily a cheaper choice or more choice. It's a different choice. And I think that for me, fundamentally, I think like when you actually look at, things like the UN or multilateral organizations that were done, what do we say? We say people have the right to, and that's why I say it comes back to basics and values. People have the right to life, right? People have the right to living, not exploitation and stuff, right? So no slave labor, that kind of stuff. And we look at that, like for me, I think the concept of universal healthcare is important to all. Now, that means a little bit more taxes for me, then yeah, so be it. But why should somebody who is sick not have access to some basic healthcare, right? So in a European society, people are willing to pay for that. In American society, people are not willing to pay for that. I mean, now they have it, but and it's political as well. But I think that's the piece, right? So it's not about the differences between capitalism and not. And I think capitalism also, look, a lot of capitalistic countries have antitrust laws. They have things when companies become too big, their sphere of influence, their control. I mean, right now, if you guys should really watch the space that's coming. But with Facebook, Google, and Facebook, actually, it was funny. I was listening to somebody who said Facebook's scandal last year has been the one thing that has united people across both sides of the aisle in the US. And that has been around the fact that people realize that they need to do something about it. And I think you guys should really watch the space as young people, because there is a whole debate around how big can we let a company go, and especially given data is at the core of it. And do we want a capitalist society that is monetizing this data and you are the product, right? Because we are moving into that system where you are the product. You are not the consumer. A lot of us think we're consumers of these platforms, but at the end of the day, if somebody's giving something to you for free, you're the product. And so how much of that are they monetizing of you? They're monetizing you. And should they be giving that back to you, right? And I think this is where also tokenomics, which is something completely outside of the crypto space in a way, but that democratization of your value into society, you might be able to get some of it back. And I think there's this whole discussion that's happening right now, which is going to change the way that we actually look at what kind of society we want to live with. And then there's another piece of it, which is happening in China today, which is a highly centralized system where government and big tech are kind of in the same pockets, and they're going completely the reverse direction, right? And I think India has not made kind of a choice on where they are on this, but you know, there's a big debate going on between Europe, US, and China in terms of model, and it goes into various aspects of privacy, you know, how we look at big tech, how we look at democratization of data or privacy of data.
That's a little bit of food for thought for all of us, I guess. And so, yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
Glenn, it's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure for you to join us and to sort of, Shubh has been, Shubh Goel says he's quite inspired by you. So that's probably a really nice compliment that one can get from any student, I would say. And so, yeah, on behalf of the Indian School of Business and Finance, I thank you very much for taking our time from your busy schedule and, you know, answering questions of students and myself alike. I would like to consider my student at least for life.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think we all should.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It has been great.
Well, thank you all very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
And
thank you so
good luck. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending.